So we got the clicker anywhere. Is it here? There we go. Is this the clicker for the slides? Sorry. Okay. Okay. Well, good morning. Oh, afternoon, sorry. Is it morning or afternoon? Afternoon. It's great to be here. The title of this talk is the Rise and Fall and Rise Again of the Warehouse Group. It was a title given for a talk I gave a while ago. And when that was put there, I said, there's something missing. And the person said, what? I said, well, there needs to be a question mark on the end. Because I think there is a question mark on where that lands. We've started a journey, and I'll talk a bit about that journey. But whether or not it lands in grand success, time will tell, to be honest, and that will play over a much longer time than my tenure in the group. A little bit about myself, as was in the kind introduction there from Joe. I'm from South Wales. I'm from a very working class background in South Wales. Coal and steel in the area I lived in. Often people say to me, I visited Wales, it's a beautiful country. Not where I'm from. There's a 6-mile-long steelworks, the biggest in Europe, just on our doorstep. But I grew up in that environment, brought up in state housing, 57 year clan. I still remember being born in the front bedroom. Well, I don't remember, but I know the house I was born in. And state housing, a background with no aspiration, awful schooling, with no teachers who inspired whatsoever. And everyone in my family, I'm the youngest of 5, left school at 15, except for me. I only didn't leave because by 1978, Britain was such a basket case that I couldn't get a job anywhere. And so I ended up going back to school and suddenly realized that these things called A-levels I could do. And I ended up getting what I saw as a super apprenticeship, which was doing a degree in mining engineering with what was the National Coal Board. And going into their management training, which was fantastic training, underground management training. But it all came to a crashing end in 1984-85 when there was a year-long mining strike, and the industry collapsed very quickly after that. I then moved into retail and worked through my career, worked hard, got promoted, and had various roles. Ended up running Walmart's logistics in Canada, was UK logistics director for Tesco, had some CEO profitability roles as well for some wholesale divisions. But I was never particularly ambitious and in terms of for position. And really, living in Canada, we loved Canada, except it was too cold. And I thought, where could we live that the climate's a bit better than Canada, they speak English, I can live near the sea, and it's got a good rugby team. And so that's why New Zealand came on the agenda. I actually didn't come to work for the Warehouse Group, I just emigrated. And I lived in a motel for 5 weeks in Orewa, and the first company I contacted was the Warehouse Group. And I've been involved with the Warehouse Group really since that back end of 2002. I'm going to tell you the story as I see it of the Warehouse Group and where we're at. And from that, as an audience that I think is either CEOs or aspiring CEOs, or people just trying to figure out what this weird species CEOs are about, hopefully will give some insight and interest to that. The Warehouse is an iconic New Zealand business, the Red Sheds part of the Warehouse. You know, Stephen Tyndall, back in 1983, was one of the first in to really make the best of the opening of trade, and there was massive rapid growth. And that all looks easy with hindsight, but he had a great team around him. He selected great people, as Glenn says. It's never just one person. People like Glenn Inger and Neil Plummer and Gerard Peterson, who they developed this business very quickly. And it was very successful. He had a partnership model, a little bit like a franchise model that allowed him to expand more quickly than anyone else. And floated the company in 1994 with an IPO, and really landed by about 2000 as a company that had been highly successful. But most of the original people had actually done very well and had left, and was now in this stage of, well, we're now a public company. We need growth, and we need professional managers to take this business forward. And so it went into a phase, really, of the 2000s, just coinciding with me joining, actually, of decline. And no correlation, I'm sure. But basically, you know, the 2000s, it sounds harsh, that, but people were well-meaning and trying to do their best. But in some ways, when a business grows very fast, what's made it successful can be very, very much just entrepreneurialism, innovation. It gets to a stage where it needs good ways of doing things, good process across functions, etc. But often what it ends up with isn't good process and functions and maintaining its innovation and trading energy. Often what you get is you get bureaucracy. You get slowness. And when I joined the company in 2002, it was by far the smallest company I'd ever worked for. I'd never worked for a company with less than 30,000 people up until joining the warehouse group. But also, it was the most bureaucratic and slow company I'd ever worked for, to be quite honest. That may surprise people, but it was. Because it had never developed a way of being able to get things done across multiple functions with different departments, all with a different point of view, that was a common way of working that really ensured good execution. And in a way, through the 2000s, the business looked for some major initiatives. Australia, I stood in as CEO of Australia for 7 months back in 2003. Food, neither of which, they were like big strategies, neither of which really came off. And if you look back with hindsight, I think the reason they didn't come off was really competitive issues. We didn't bring anything new to the customer in Australia that differentiated ourselves. In food, we didn't really bring anything different to what the two large players bring nowadays. No differentiation on price, no differentiation on product, no differentiation on customer experience. And retail is about competition. And you do have to have that competitive difference. And being a public company as well, there's always the pressure or perceived pressure of the market, and many people having opinions. And in a way, by the end of the 2000s, the business had had a long period of ongoing decline, especially the core Red Sheds business. In a way, Australia and food took attention away from the core Red Sheds business. And it all culminated, I suppose, with something called Project Invigorate in 2009, which was basically sales had stagnated for about 7 years, and I'll show you a graph on that in a second. When your sales are stagnating in retail, if you have negative sales, it's very hard to grow profit. You can't keep growing margins. It's pure competition in retail, and that limits your ability to do that. And therefore, your income starts declining, so you are forced to a cost reduction strategy. You've got to watch your costs in retail constantly. But ultimately, it's hard to cut costs on an ongoing way in a scalper-like fashion, especially without damaging the customer experience in retail. And Project Invigorate was a large project that had all the trappings of a professional project, all the great PowerPoint, but basically took 500 people out of our stores. And it was the sort of final step, really. It severely undermined morale to the point where over half our team went and joined a union. Now, that's not an anti-union statement. It's merely indicating that they went to a third party, overall. And so the team became very demotivated. Execution in store declined to the point the product wasn't even getting to the shelf. And so by about 2010, 2011, I believe the company was on a precipice of really tipping over into even faster sales decline. And this was the sales record between FY05 and FY11. Every year but one, we had sales decline. The compound effect of that on your income, on your gross profit dollars, your cash GP, which in retail is everything, it pays for everything, is huge. And the pressure then to hold up profits through cost reduction becomes ongoing and culminated in that Project Invigorate. I sort of, between about 2004 and 2008, I sort of went down to a one-day-a-week advisory role on the business. I struggled to communicate in the early 2000s what I felt was wrong with the business, probably my own fault. In some ways, I was probably too blunt and too direct. Unfortunately, some of the things I thought would come to pass did come to pass, and I mean unfortunately. Warehouse Stationery, which was another business in the group, was on a sort of lead curve in front of where the Red Sheds were at. By 2009, it had declined into 10% sales decline and was heading for a loss. And I was asked to come back on board more full-time in 2009. I went away and did a theology degree for 3 years. We can talk about that separately if you want. But I came back and took over as CEO of Warehouse Stationery in 2009 and applied a lot of the principles that we're going to talk about that led to a fairly dramatic recovery in warehouse stationery from a business with poor morale, heading for a loss and steep sales decline, to strong sales growth, strong profit growth, and also high engagement from the team. So the period from 2011 is where I've put, okay, fall, will we rise again? And I think the challenge of leadership, and CEO is about leadership, firstly, is really to bring clarity to for three things. There's a number of ways of viewing leadership. There's what Glenn talked about earlier, what are the attributes of good leaders? And there's a commonality to that comes through, as was demonstrated there. There's what does a good leader look like, a type, and we'll touch on that a little bit later with a leadership framework. But there's a function of leadership. And the function of leadership, I think, is to bring clarity to three things. Firstly, clarity of purpose. Clarity of the purpose of the organization, what it's trying to achieve. And that translates into that forward-looking aspect of leadership. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves that helps others flourish. They want to understand what the purpose of the organization is. And they want to be part of that. And it needs to be consistent. And leadership's role, function, is to bring clarity to that. The leader, the CEO, hasn't got to have all the answers. To be honest, the business would be in trouble if that was what I was expected to do. It's a team, but the leader has got to ensure it's brought out, it's clarified, and is clear. Secondly, the leader needs to ensure there's clarity of principles in the business. And by principles, I mean not just values and behavioral principles. I include that, incredibly important. What behavior is acceptable around here? What are our values? And bringing them to life. A leader needs to make sure there's real clarity around that. But also principles of how we operate. How do things get done around here? How do meetings get run? Do they start on time? Do people turn up? Is the most senior person the one who's always late, which is a sort of subtle way of saying I'm important, and you can all wait around for me? Are there next steps taken? Is there a clear purpose to the meeting? Is attendance important? Well, are there subtle passive resistance by people not attending? And is that accepted overall? Do they really have decisions made? Is the purpose of the meeting clear? Is the objective clear? Are the right people in the room? Is the frequency appropriate? Or are they just rituals? Just things we go through while we try and get on with our job from another boring, sort of dysfunctional meeting. So the principles of how you get things done also should be clarified. Problem solving, innovation. Is there clarity of how that's done? Is there clarity of that word we don't like to use? Where does power sit? Who can make decisions and how do decisions get made? Are we open and authentic about that? Those are all the principles that add up to how things are done around here as well. So clarity of purpose, clarity of principles, and finally, clarity of priorities. Ultimately, all strategy is dressing up what are the key priorities for the business. What's the most important things we've got to do? Because you can't do everything. Therefore, a leadership's role, the CEO's role, is to ensure clarity of priorities. So, taking those basic functions of a leadership, I'm going to talk through what we've done over the last 4.5 years, and then wrap that up at the end. As a group, going back about 4.5 years ago, really we were just the red sheds with a small blue sheds business. A business with a good heritage, but that it was, as I said, I think on the precipice of some real difficult issues. We talked about a vision statement. We've not put this on walls anywhere. It's not really written anywhere. It's just more talked about. It's directional. To build a 100-year company that delivers long-term sustainable, profitable growth that helps Aotearoa New Zealand flourish. And all of those words are important. The long-term part, first of all, was correcting what had become a very short-term bias. Leadership is a lot of both ands, directive and participative, long-term and short-term. And the thing is keeping that tension in place. You do have to be short-term in business, especially in retail, on lots of things. But if you start doing things short-term, constantly, every half after every half, that undermines the fundamental health of the business, you've got to relook at your strategy. And that's largely where the Warehouse Group had started to land. In the 10 years between the 2000s, we refitted 10 stores. Now, we've got about 90 stores. You do the maths. That tells you every store on average will get refitted every 90 years. So this room, if you were the hotel owner here of the Langham, won't get touched for 90 years. You can't do that. You've got to have a cycle of reinvestment and refitting. And if you don't keep up with that, you're going to have a problem. It's just one little example. Our team had become incredibly demotivated by the short-term nature of what was trying to happen. So the long-term is important, but we need profitable growth. Business does have to be profitable or you can't invest. So it's not saying that that's not important. It's absolutely critical. Your profit is absolutely critical in a business to be able to keep on investing. And the Aotearoa New Zealand part and helping that flourish is recognizing that business does not exist in isolation. A business is part of a society. And as a large business, you have a wider responsibility. And good businesses need good societies because you need thriving customers. Similarly, good societies need good businesses. The government hasn't got any money. It's got taxes from people employed in businesses, taxes on profits of businesses, and taxes on goods and services of businesses, and debt. But basically, it's a symbiotic relationship, and businesses do have a responsibility wider. And it's just recognizing that as a leading retailer in our vertical, that we've got a role to play with that, and it's an important part of the business. We looked at our strengths, and if we looked at the Australian venture, you looked at food, where we sat back and said, well, did we really have any competencies and competitive advantage to bring there? And so we sat back and said, what's our strengths? Well, number one, New Zealand scale. Having scale in New Zealand is actually quite difficult. It's a small country, 4.5 million. Scale does bring certain competitive advantages. It allows you to hire the best people. It gives certain purchasing advantages. It can give disadvantages, scale, as well, if things become bureaucratic and slow. But it does give advantages. And that was one of our strengths, was New Zealand scale. And most verticals in New Zealand can only cope with about 2 companies. I've only really got space for about 2 companies of scale. You take the food market, you take hardware, you take telco. It's very hard, with 4.5 million people, to have room for more than 2 companies with scale. So New Zealand scale, we thought, was an advantage. Understanding the New Zealand customer. New Zealand is, the GDP per head in New Zealand is about 1/3 lower than Australia. New Zealanders are very price conscious, very bargain conscious. In the retail market in particular, that makes them very promotionally aware. There are certain attributes. I often say to people we recruit from overseas, be it the UK, Australia, or the USA. Let's translate what you know, not transfer it. We've got to translate things into this market, and we do feel understanding the New Zealand customer should be a source of real competitive advantage. Sourcing, logistics, and retail, the core technical competencies we need. We've got an office in China, for example, with about 90-odd people in. Gives us, we feel, real sourcing advantage overall, running retail stores and logistics. I would add now, actually, 4.5 years later, I'd add to this digital and multi-channel expertise. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. I wouldn't have added that 4 years ago, but I would now. And finally, our people and a way of working and culture. We'd started to develop in warehouse stationery, a way of working based on best practice from around the world. And really, we want to make that a source of competitive advantage for us as a group. And I'll touch a bit more on that as well. So 4 years later, we've changed a lot as a group. From what was just the warehouse and warehouse stationery, we've moved into some other verticals, either organically or by acquisition. Noah Lehman was acquired about 2.5 years ago, a leading technology appliance retail business. Torpedo 7, which we feel can be a really strong outdoor adventure sport business, very much a new business. Our group source and support area is a profit center, and I think alluded to by Glenn, profit center responsibility is very different to being a cost center manager, and it's important for people to get a responsibility for, because you're making all the trade-offs required. Our source and support is more like vertical integration. It's set up as profit centers now. That's the sourcing office in China and a number of other business that source and supply product into our group. And financial services, where we're developing our own financial services business to support the sale of product. And I'll talk a bit about that when we talk how this is translated into our 6 strategic priorities. So, been a lot of change. The group very much reshaped. Really, you come to priorities that have come out of that. There's 6 key priorities that have driven the last journey over the last 4.5 years. Firstly, keep the red core strong. The red sheds is still the largest part of the business. If I want to get on TV or in the media, I wear a red shirt. I could wear an Noel Lehman shirt. I could wear a stationery shirt. I could wear a Torpedo 7 shirt. But the iconic brand that's well known is the red sheds. And it is the largest part of the business. So keeping the red core strong has been a critical part of our strategy. To do that, we needed to address some of the key issues of the brand. And by brand, I don't mean anything fancy, just the key things that comes to people's mind when they think of that brand. So we had to address product quality. Private label quality had never been addressed in the 2000s. So we actually got rid of a lot of the private labels we had, like Transonic, Cascade. We've replaced them with a number of other brands, in-house brands. And it's cost us a lot of money to do that, as we've had to get rid of products, etc. But it's been the right thing to do. Vion TVs, for example, now is the top-selling TV brand in New Zealand. That's built up that's in just 4 years. That's built up to this position it's got. So keep the red core strong. We've had to refit our stores. Our stores were extremely tired. They weren't acceptable shopping environments. So we've spent about $100 million there to refit our store base. And we had to re-energize our people, bring alive that clarity of purpose so that they feel they are part of a business that really cares for them. That's led to our investment in the career retailer wage. Career retailer wage, originally benchmarked against the living wage data, has meant that our trained people, our fully trained people, have gone from earning about $16 an hour to earning it somewhere between $18 and $20 an hour once they're fully trained. 60% of our team is now on that. That's costing us about $6 million a year. But retail is a people business. And that caricature of a sullen, unhelpful retail team member, is not just a caricature. We've all experienced that. And when you experience that 2 or 3 times, you don't come back. And so we've revitalized the people, we've revitalized the infrastructure, we've revitalized the products, we've revitalized our community programs. The red shirts in school, for example, dwindled to being about 200 students a year. Red shirts in school now has about 3,000 16 to 18-year-olds getting their first taste of work experience in our stores. And I think it is moving the dial on brand, moving the dial on people's perception of the business from where it was 4 years ago. Still a lot to do. We've had 17 quarters of sales growth now after 7 years of decline. So a big tick on customer, a big tick on people, on profit, and I'll touch on that later, about an amber, and I'll talk to that in a minute. To grow non-red, profit to be as large as red. All our eggs were in one basket, really, with the red sheds. So we've broadened our scope to apply our core competencies to. Warehouse stationery has continued to be a very successful business. Noel Leeming, in the process of really revitalizing that business, gaining a market share and differentiating itself against the competition. And building a new business in Torpedo 7 in the outdoor adventure sport category, where we felt there was a place for a strong number 2. Thirdly, to be the leading digital retailer in New Zealand. I know this morning you've all been scared to death about the changes going on in digital overall. This device in our pockets, whoops, just phone someone. Has changed the world. Oh. That wasn't planned. It has changed the world. This device has radically changed things over the last 5 years. 4 years ago, we really didn't have anything online. We had about 5,000 products. Now all our businesses are fully online. We fully click and collect. You order online, pick up in store. We've got endless aisles, as we call it, where if you go to a smaller store, you can order products that aren't in that store, etc. So the customers can shop anywhere, any way. The other thing, though, that's changed is not just online. What's also changed is marketing. Traditional marketing channels like TV and press are declined in their efficacy. Very few people read a newspaper now. You'll go online to stuff.co or nzherald.co. As soon as you get time-delayed TV, My Sky or anything, you stop watching adverts unless it's live sport that's on. And so that's all changing as well. So that whole digital online piece has changed very fast. I say to some people, change is faster than you think and it's slower than you think. On the one hand, there's 2 equal and opposite balances. You don't be scared to death by it, but do embrace it. 18 years ago, I was home shopping and supply chain director for a British retailer called Iceland. We had a £50 million online business. That was 18 years ago. So change has been slow, but it's also fast. And for a business like ours, a mass market business, we haven't got to lead things, but we have got to be a reasonably fast follower overall. And that's what we've tried to do in this area. And already we can rightfully claim to be New Zealand's largest online retail group by quite a distance. Fourth area, source better products at better prices. Now, ultimately, product and price is what retail is all about. Via any channel, that's what people want. They actually don't want the flashiest shopping environment. They actually don't want the flashiest website. What really will work is product and price. It does come back to that. So this is a really key priority to us and why we've put so much emphasis in this area, both from getting branded products into the red sheds, for example, through the acquisition of Noel Leeming and the improvement in our private label products. And still being a bit down and dirty as traders with things like parallel import and bringing that bargain and excitement, which New Zealanders want. Where there's controlled supply channels into New Zealand, which there still are by default, breaking that by bringing some excitement and bringing bargains to New Zealanders. Fifth, to be leading New Zealand retail financial services business. Once you get above products costing about $300, finance becomes an important part of the product. And ethical finance being done properly with that becomes important. So we'd had a joint venture with Westpac for a long time. We'd been in this financial services business for about 13 years with them. But when we acquired Noel Leeming, it really changed the game in the scale of purchases that would be above about $300. We felt we could build a book that would be equal to F&P Finance in scale of about $600 million. And so we've decided to do this ourselves rather than outsource via Westpac or via GE. And that's an early stage business for us that we'll be launching some very exciting and innovative credit card products in about September. Finally, sixth is leverage group competencies and scale. And I'll talk a bit more about this. As a group, our parenting strategy really is fairly hands-off. It's what we call freedom in framework. Our brands are very different. Each of our retail brands has a different brand positioning and personality. And therefore, each of our brands has got a CEO. So I'm a CEO of CEOs overall. So from a group perspective, really what we've said is everything will be in the brands unless it either gives significant cost advantage or gives significant subject matter expertise. And actually, very few things do that for us. And the reason we say that is I want stuff nearer the customer. Because the more you remove it away from the customer, the more the tendency to bureaucracy will kick in. And therefore, we deliberately haven't got some massive integration strategy across all these business units. Part of that group competency is culture and way of working. And that's what I'll unpack a bit more now overall. This slide, which sometimes internally is called the Star Trek diagram, because it looks like a bit like the insignia of Star Trek, it really sets out the frameworks that we feel add competitive advantage from a way of working perspective. On your left-hand side is a number of frameworks about leadership and teams and problem solving. On the right-hand side are a number of principles. It looks a lot, but actually it's not a lot. When we acquired Noel Leeming, as I said to the CEO, Noel Leeming, this is a non-negotiable. This is part of being part of the group. Now, you can help change it and make it better for the group, but this has to happen because it's best practice. Now, that can sound quite dictatorial, but actually the framework's not that rigid. Virtually everything else is down in the brand strategy overall. And all these are principles to guide best practice in each of our brands. You've got a leadership framework, a team model, and thinking smarter, which is about problem solving. And on the other side, you've got business principles, customer principles, and support principles. Our business principle is customer, people, profit. It's a simple balanced scorecard. Are we making things better for customers, simpler for our people, and cheaper for profit? And the reason it's there is to recognize that profit is an outcome. Spreadsheets aren't real. It's an outcome of serving customers well and having real competitive advantage for your customers through your people that will produce those outcomes. And things have to be executed. They can't stay on PowerPoint. You have to get stuff done. The balance of speed and deliberation. Sometimes you do have to deliberate, but you've got to get stuff done, overall. And so the business principles are really just saying a balanced scorecard, and be thinking about that. If we really care for our customers, how can we keep selling a product that's not fit for purpose? If we really care for our customers, how could we save costs over here just to hit a target over here, but be satisfied that it will mean we'll lose sales? You've got to keep that trade-off in balance. Sounds obvious, but in large organizations, the obvious gets lost overall. Our customer principles within that are very simple. It's just reminding people what retail is about. It's not rocket science. Product, price, promotion, customer experience. You may be sitting there thinking, well, why is that a big deal? Because it focuses conversation. Every time I visit a store, I ask for feedback. Give me 3 B's and 3 C's. 3 benefits, things that are going well. 3 C's, 3 concerns. 3 things that could be better. I'm not there to do a military inspection and pretend I know everything about retail and point out things that are wrong. I'm looking for feedback for the office, for our teams, about what we can do better for our customers and our people to drive our profit. And really, in retail, it falls into 4 areas. Product, price, promotion, or customer experience. What are the things we can do better in those areas? What are the things we're doing well and should keep on doing? And that feedback loop feeds into weekly feedback from our stores. It feeds into what we call brainwaves and feedback, and it focuses that people don't feel frightened of bringing stuff up. It's a simple directional discussion point that says, product, price, promotion, customer experience. What can we do better? It's a lens to look things through. Support principles are similar. The support principles are when you have things that keep on going wrong in an organization, repetitive things, often which if they're not addressed, people eventually just accept. The root cause of those things will either be in people, process, systems, or policy. Very simple. That will be where the root cause will be. It'll either be the processes are inappropriate, not well designed. It will either be that systems aren't appropriate, well designed. It will either be that our people are not clear on expectations, our people aren't clear on scope and objective, they're not trained well enough. What's frustrating is when you do root cause, everything eventually is leadership's fault. It always is. You haven't trained people well enough. You haven't set direction well enough. You haven't given scope and objective clear enough. You've not motivated people well enough so they're engaged, that they're not just compliant, that they're committed. Or policy. And policy is an odd word. People associate policy with bureaucracy. Actually, policy is really important. Policy is directional clarity on key issues. And often, if policies aren't made clear by leadership, people make things up themselves. So you're actually abdicating, not delegating. On key issues, your price and promotional strategy in retail, for example, that policy needs to be clear on how you act. Leadership framework, really all we've distilled there is virtually, we did a complete review of all the key leadership frameworks out there. There's a lot of old wine in new bottles every 5 years. The leadership principles are fairly consistent over time when you look at all the models. We've distilled that into what good looks like. Who am I? Understanding yourself, understanding your impact, understanding others. What do you do? Customer-led, execute simple, understand the business, continuously improve. How do I lead? Set the example, seize the future, create one team, develop in others. It's a distillation of most models that are out there. A team model is clarifying what a good team looks like. The base of any team is trust. And trust isn't some sort of wishy-washy word. It means you're trusting that the others in the team that you're together with actually do want the best for you and the best for the organization. Trust means there won't be elephants in the room. Trust means you will give feedback to someone rather than ignore an issue about their impact, which wouldn't be their intent, I'm sure. Nobody in a meeting deliberately wants to be a dick. Yeah? But are you helping them by ignoring that? Or is feedback a gift? Yeah? Sometimes my team will say to me, Mark, we need to give you some feedback. Remember, feedback's a gift. Yeah. But trust generates that type of discussion. If you trust, you'll have robust debate. Well, you need robust debate. You need healthy conflict. If you don't have that, you won't get good problem solving. You won't get good decision making. All this diversity we talk about in personality types or backgrounds will mean nothing because it's not brought to the table. People will be wondering, is this the right thing to say or not? They'd be wondering which way's I've got a different view. Everyone else seems to agree with what's being discussed, but I think we're missing something. I better keep quiet. Unless you've created an environment where robust debate is valued. And that debate should always be results-focused. It shouldn't be inward-looking. It should be about customer, people, profit, execution. It should be about improving things for our people. It should be about dealing with issues that are results-focused for the good of the organization. If you get that sort of triad of trust, robust debate, and results focus, you will get commitment. You won't get people leaving meetings going, oh, well, that was a waste of time, that meeting. We didn't discuss what we should discuss. There won't be an elephant in the room, which no one wants to address because you just don't bring that up in this organization. Things get discussed, put on the table, move forward, and solved. And from that comes commitment and comes personal ownership. Personal ownership means actually your role as a leader is genuinely then changed into coaching, rather than coaching. And actually often what you find is your coaching is to stop people beating themselves up too much because they overown, rather than holding people accountable and people ducking and diving to avoid what might be a blame culture. Team model there is, those of you who will have picked it up already, is a complete copy of the work of Patrick Lencioni and reversed. And it's probably the best book ever written on teams, Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. The other component then is thinking smarter, which is the adaptation of simple problem-solving tools, innovation tools, into a retail environment, which have been trained hugely widely across the whole organization to give a common language for that robust debate and problem-solving. Brainstorming, fishbone analysis, post-it, 5 whys, Pareto analysis. Things that I would imagine most of you in this room are aware of at some given times. But for it to really work, the whole company and teams need to share a common language. It doesn't matter sometimes which you choose, but there's a commonality, and it makes things a lot quicker to get into issues and solve them and move forward. Then some simple tools on evaluating options. Rather than it just being who shouts the loudest, there's some criteria we can evaluate things to. And then some simple tools on execution. What makes good execution overall as well. That brings a commonality across the whole business. So I've thrown a lot at you there. Overall, 6 key strategies, strategic priorities to drive it. Keep the red core strong, grow non-red to be as large as red, be the leading digital multi-channel retailer, sourcing better products at better prices, leading financial services business, and leveraging our competencies and scale. So how's it going? Overall, last 4.5 years, I think on the customer, I'd give a big tick. I think all our businesses have been in growth, and the biggest customer feedback you get in retail is sales. And if you're getting those sales without giving away margin, you're not buying them. So that's a positive. All our businesses are generating market growth and popularity in that sense. From a people point of view, we've got highly engaged teams. We've put in place a lot of things that help engagement, and that's come through across all our business units. On a profits point of view, I give us amber. Largely, we've done a lot of work to stand still. And as a public company, people might be critical of that. Why hasn't there been a magic wand that meant everything's just gone poof into the future? I'm comfortable about that. To be honest, if we hadn't have done what we'd have done, what that graph there shows where we'd have trended. If we'd have carried on at -2% sales decline, -3% sales decline, and I think that's a conservative view, I think it would have accelerated as the stores became more tired. Even a conservative view says our profit would have been half today what it is now. The challenge for the business now, having gone through that period of investment catch-up, is to leverage profitable growth for our shareholders so we can keep on investing in the business. So I'd give us, on customer, people, profit, 2 greens and an amber at the moment. I think from a point of view of aspiring CEOs as well, is you also need to know your timing. I've indicated that I'll be finishing this role once I've done 5 years in February. I think the business will be ready for a new phase, a new voice, and I committed that I would only do 5 years right from the beginning overall. And I think the business will then be set up for a next stage of a journey. The key thing, though, is that we've, I believe, made the right decisions over the last few years and balanced customer, people, profit in terms of how we're trying to take it forward. So for those aspiring CEOs out there, I see in large organizations at senior middle management level, a lot of, how would I phrase it? I was going to say cowardice, and that's too harsh. A lot of lack of courage. I think you do need courage. You need to figure things out, problem solve well, come back to principles, and do the right thing. There's a quote there from Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man. This is from about the early 1900s. I should say the person, sorry about that, who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who comes up short again, because there's no effort without error or shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that his place shall never be in the cold, timid souls who neither know victory or defeat. Often at these conferences, you get people stand up and they've been a success. Everything's a success. I think we create a culture of fear of failure. But actually being a leader means you have to cope with the possibility of failure as well. You actually learn the most in failure. In my career, if I went back, it was in difficult times, adversity, perhaps a better word than failure. You have to be prepared to be resilient. You have to be prepared to work with your team to get to decisions where the answers aren't black and white, and make decisions to go forward, or deliberately decide to withhold a decision from that. That requires a certain amount of resilience and courage that I don't see enough in senior middle managers. And is the big difference if they're going to make the step up to being a CEO of a business unit. It's that confidence, not arrogance, to problem solve well, to apply your thinking, to take a business forward and lead it well so that it can thrive for the future. Thank you very much.